I am content to only talk about this stuff. And Coleman, I wanted to ask you something that I'd sort of teased for you via text before we got into the room with respect to the criticism, the takedowns of yourself that have been published subsequent to your appearing on Capitol Hill. As Matt alluded to, some folks said you were too young to be in that room.
Again,
you didn't have the credentials.
Obviously true.
That you didn't have the credentials. You couldn't do it. I wonder how much of that coverage you've been paying attention to. And I wonder if there is anything salient in any of the critiques of your presentation that you've sort of thought more about since your participation in there.
No, I mean, I've been paying attention to my Twitter mentions. Or not today, but yesterday. I spent a good 4 hours. It felt like 20 minutes, just refreshing. Completely masochistic, but no. I mean, almost half of what I was seeing was the claim that I'm not actually an African. I'm not actually African American, or I'm not actually an American descendant of slavery. ADOS. That I was surprised.
ADOS.
Yeah, I was really surprised by how much of what I was getting was from that community. So to the point where I felt so silly doing this, but I posted a link to the records that Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation, has of my grandfather and our lineage. I felt silly even playing the game, but there was such an easy way.
It was like showing your long form birth certificate.
Right. It's because it's public record, I felt like this will, it's just a fact. It's right there and it's a fact, but it didn't stop it. And I really wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to be called a coon and an Uncle Tom and whatnot. And there was some of that.
Because it's Wednesday.
Right, of course. But no, I haven't yet seen, and I've been kind of hoping to see a substantial critique of what I said, because I guess John McWhorter and Cornel West were on Don Lemon.
Yeah, I saw that clip.
And, McWhorter had some really interesting thoughts, as he almost always does, where he was saying he might be able to get behind reparations and was sort of struggling with it in real time if it would really be recognized as the other shoe dropping, as he would say, as something significant. If we could agree beforehand, we're going to do reparations, and on the condition that it's really seen as something important. It's not dismissed like Black History Month or affirmative action as not really it's,
they gave us the shortest month of the year, Coleman. Obviously.
Exactly.
Obviously. Of course, the history of how we got there is totally different, but whatever.
But if it's really recognized as a mea culpa that is meaningful, he was saying he would support it, but he doubts that it will. I also doubt that it will.
Kmele, do you get the hashtag ADOS people coming after you? Because they really should.
I've only had it a few times, actually under somewhat similar circumstances, in that I was talking about reparations on television. And in this particular case, I was on CNN, and I was actually supposed to be on with Sandy Dougherty, who is an economics professor at Duke University. He did that very famous, often talked about study with respect to the disparities in wealth between blacks and whites in Boston, and is also the perhaps the principal champion, if not the originator, of this notion of baby bonds, which is one iteration of how a reparations scheme might be designed. And Sandy and I ended up sort of going back and forth on Twitter a little bit, and I was respectful. I want to talk to Sandy. I actually invited him on the podcast. He didn't necessarily accept the invitation, and sometimes I invite people and they accept and I don't follow up because I got other things going on, but I promise I will. And they came out of the woodwork and were just going in on me. And one of them, and this happens very frequently, where they say, well, you're one of those first generation Americans, you don't get the money anyways, so you don't get an opinion, you don't get to say anything about whether or not we could take it. It's always that, and you don't speak for us. When I always make it a point to never try and speak for you. I speak on behalf of Kmele and Coleman. If I was going to offer any criticism whatsoever of your very stellar presentation, it would be, and you already know what it is, whenever someone talks about, Black people as a community, what we need, it makes me cringe.
Let him decide.
He's allowed. He's allowed.
Pluralize.
He's allowed. I'm just having a disagreement with my friend in the room. I'm allowed.
I find that both we and they strike me as wrong. And
we, they, us, all of it is
so
like.
Every time I write they, I cringe, and every time I write we, I cringe, and by the time I've run out of cringeworthy pronouns, there's nothing left. But
they don't object. They don't object to it in general. They only object to it when you do it.
But they wouldn't have objected to any of the specific statements that I made that I started with we.
That's the other part of this that's so amazing. You endorse a more limited version of reparations. Yeah. You endorsed it during your presentation. You talk about all of the fundamental issues that you're concerned about with respect to these disparities in the criminal justice system, with respect to wealth, and that you express the same kind of concern. You're only skeptical about whether or not the approach works. And I find myself always shocked by how often I'm in a position like that, where I agree with you on the objective. Like, I want the same thing you do, but we disagree fundamentally on the means. And it just becomes an apocalyptic conflict because I'm not on board with that portion of the agenda. Did you have that sense? Or were you aware of that in the moment? Or are you aware of it all the time, perhaps?
I was definitely aware of it in the moment. And I think that's one of probably the main reason why I got so much more hate than Burgess Owens, who is the other person testifying against the motion. He more or less dismissed the entire concept of reparations from a kind of spiritual bootstrapping sentiment. I know he's religious as well. Also,
liberals are evil. So.
Yeah. Also, the Democratic Party, he says, is essentially should be understood as the party of slavery. The Republican Party should be understood as the party of Lincoln.
They're the real racists.
Right,
the Democrat plantation.
How many times did he invoke Robert Byrd? Let's use the Byrd rule. You have to mention Robert Byrd.
Yeah, so all of these things I think are really ahistorical things to say. But he ended up getting much less hate, I think, than I did, perhaps because he's older. But I think also because I was the near enemy. He was kind of the far enemy. And the near enemy, I think, gets under your skin more because they understand half of your point of view and agree with it, perhaps. And the fact that they agree with it marks them as not insane or not obviously insane therefore easy to dismiss.
You have to,
Then it gets under your skin more.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, after my testimony, which I thought was reasonable almost by definition, somebody got up. I don't know if you could see this in the video. Somebody got up and said, I literally cannot hear this.
Yeah.
And slowly walked out of the room.
I saw that. Yeah.
I don't know how many hours this person traveled to come to this 3.5 hour testimony, but after an hour, gets up, makes a scene, and leaves the room. And we're all waiting for him to leave. And he's just saying, I can't listen to this. Yeah. I cannot hear this.
It's too much. The fact that you disagree with me in a subtle, nuanced way.
I endorse reparations for certain people. And it's so upsetting that you get up in the middle of this massive event that you've been privileged enough to get into and leave. Like, what?
Can I ask another thing, Coleman? And Candace Owens in particular, I don't really like to talk about. I'm not coming for Candace. I don't think she's a great Satan that needs to be destroyed. I do oftentimes
she's a great Satan who doesn't need to be destroyed.
I do oftentimes find her to be like a figure of fun rather than a serious person. But people who are not particularly sophisticated in terms of their analysis of folks that they disagree with will oftentimes think that me and Candace sort of play for the same team. And I suspect oftentimes make the same presumption about you, Coleman. And one of the things that I thought about when you were like, oh, I'm going to go do this was like, damn, Candace just did it. They're going to look at you and it's Candace. Like they won't differentiate between the two of you. And it won't matter that you're better. And it won't matter that what you're saying is more substantive and that you're more thoughtful and that there are data points that you're alluding to here and that you're not a Trumpist. They'll just make all of the presumptions and try to destroy you anyways. But I wonder if you have thoughts on the ways in which your perspective is different from that of to the extent this is a thing, conventional Black MAGA conservative.
Yeah. So, I mean, right off the bat, there's religion. I'm an atheist, and much of the traditional, I mean, this isn't quite the MAGA Black conservative, but much of traditional Black conservatism, at least there's one large contingent that is conservative largely for social and religious reasons. That is something I've never been a part of, never even, I suppose I can understand in the abstract how a person could be religious, of course, but that's something I don't identify with in the least. In terms of President Trump, I voted for Hillary and would do it again. I think Trump is, I really voted against Trump more than I did for Hillary. But it seems to me that if you're someone who can't find anything wrong with Donald Trump, then you're just not operating in the realm of reason. And if you can't tell the difference between Candace and me, then I think you're just not trying hard enough.
You're not paying attention. You're not paying attention to what anyone is.
It's an extraordinarily shallow comparison.
Yeah.
Although Camille's phrasing of that or posing of that question made me think that if the two of you guys went to Washington, then you could be the diamond and silk.
Who now appear with Steve King.
I'm not going to, I'll be the one that doesn't say anything. I'll be the one that just moves her head, snapping. That's right. Yes. MAGA. That would be me. Which one is that? Is that diamond or silk?
Head swivel that many times in the 9 years I've known.